module inspired from what I've heard a lot of math teachers say, and that's how do you create a math PBL? And it's a great question. And what I know they're meaning by that is how do I create a PBL from scratch? How do I look at this and look at my standards and create something for my students that's meaningful. And so this module is looking at my process of how to do that in the way that I do it currently. So it's basically broken into these four big ideas. The first one is bundling is key. The second is you got to find a worthy cause. The third is you got to check it out. And then the last is the devil is in the details. And the last one is actually going to be even expounded upon more in future modules. But we're going to still get a big idea about it today. So when it comes to looking at this, let's break it into step by step. And so what I mean by bundling is key, I am saying that you got to identify your learning goals. And what I mean by that is don't just look at your standards alone, but look at, your own personal guideline or rules that you have or what you want kids to accomplish. So don't just stop at the standards. Look at what you really want to accomplish and try to look at what will take at least 2 weeks to learn. So let me kind of exit and show you a document by which that I approach this. So what you're looking at right now is how a group of educators and I look at bundling our content that we have to teach for a year. And so this is geometry. I don't teach it currently, but I've taught it in the past. And so what the group of teachers and along with myself did is we looked at bundling things into big topics that we preferred. And so I really encourage you to look at something like that if you do have other colleagues that you work with, and then look at deciding what is a standards that take the 2 weeks and that's worthy enough to for my students to tackle. If you don't have a PLC that would come up with something like this, oftentimes, let me scroll to the second part, you may have something like this. And this document is available in the Edmodo folder for you to be able to view and see. So districts oftentimes will bundle what you're supposed to teach and cover in a period of time as well. So you saw sort of our version of what we're looking at as a group, but here's also our district's way of bundling. And so it's really important for you to look at what is naturally supposed to be taught together, because a lot of times you do have a district benchmark or some sort of assessment that you need to make sure the kids are on track for being able to show their learning. So this is always my starting point. And then let me show you what happens. So I go through the big ideas. I look to see what inside of it naturally takes 2 to 3 weeks, because often our units take more than a month now, the way we've started to bundle and teach for depth in our particular district. But there was a time that we didn't. There was times where I didn't necessarily get a whole month to really work on a concept. But I still break down that topic, and then I sort of brainstorm for myself big ideas. So here's an example of what I would do. So I just took out properties of 2D shapes, because this is actually a concept that I used to make a house house design project that you have access to in Edmodo as well. And so I typically take a pen or a highlighter, and I just start underlining what really is kind of the big things to me and big things that I would want kids to walk away with that's really something they could use as an adult and in the real world. So like perimeter and area is a huge one. Characteristics of quadrilaterals is a big one, because it's used a lot in design principles. Applying these properties of quadrilaterals. So I highlight sort of what is a huge piece. And then I may even in a different color highlight what are some nice things to know, but I'll be okay if the kids didn't master it. So maybe I'm okay with them not mastering naming the polygons by the number of sides because they could easily Google that in their adult life. Maybe I'm also fine with them not necessarily knowing what would be equal angular or equilateral. So you can go through those pieces. And then what I do is I start brainstorming ideas. What is it about this concept that's usable? Sometimes I look for inspiration in my textbook. Sometimes I ask other people I know, sort of how do they use these? And so I may, come up with a redesign of a container that is quadrilateral based, home redesign, etc. So I could do it with people. Oftentimes I've actually had to do this by myself, so it is something you could do by yourself. But I just literally brainstorm. And then I go and I literally think of these three questions, which let's go back to the next piece. So after I have looked at that, then I brainstorm these problems, then I make myself answer these questions. I think, okay, how does this really connect to the world? When I've brainstormed those ideas and I looked at those pieces, how does it really connect to the world? And I try to write out some details of how that connects. Is what I brainstormed necessary for more than one person to solve this problem? One of the key things about project based learning is that students do work by themselves, but they also need to work together to be better. And so it's not enough for them to have a problem that really could be done by themselves. It needs to be something that is enriched by the gathering of the minds. So I have to look and sort of eliminate things that one person could completely do. And then I have to truly think of the students in front of me. And what I mean by that is each year, sometimes certain projects won't work because of the students. Even though a lot of times it does, there's times that it's just not worthy of the students that's in front of me. So, for example, I have loved doing the cell phone project that I've done in my Algebra 1 class for years. It's a situation where students help families pick a cell phone plan that's best for them, and they analyze and basically using linear functions and system of equations. And a couple of years ago, it just fell flat. I didn't do this last question like I normally do. I didn't think about the students in front of me. And it just wasn't something that was of interest of them. It wasn't a need. Sort of the situation of cell phones had changed. It wasn't grasping them the way it had grabbed them before. So you want to make sure that it's something that's not only something that your kids would find intriguing, but also it's worth their time to solve. That's the other part. Is it worth them actually finding this answer, or is it something that's kind of dull and no one will really care about it? So once you've done that, and again, that's step two, brainstorming the authentic problems and looking at these questions, then you go on to actually choosing that option and starting to flush out the details. And that's where step three comes in, and you got to create real deadlines and daily checks. And deadlines meaning you have this product that you're creating and a real deadline of when they have to accomplish it. And then you have these formats and sort of, I call it a threefold process in order to check. So if you look to the left, there's a group of kids sort of talking together. One of my ways of making sure that students stay on track is having deadlines of them holding each other accountable and them checking out what they know and what they're doing. And then I also, so you'll see the picture of a teacher sort of working with a group of students. I'm also involved with checking and making sure that they're on track for producing the product for the client, as well as on track for learning. And then there's nothing wrong with the traditional assessments happening as well. When will you give your common assessment that you may do as a POC? because I work with a group of teachers, and we usually have either an exit ticket or like a short quiz that we give that we all check in on. When am I just even going to test the basic skill knowledge that I would want as a regular test? So all of these things got to be planned out and firmly dated out. And then once you have that, it makes it easier to plan the daily lessons. And so we'll wrap up with this module today, actually looking at an example of 2 days within a lesson plan. And then the module tomorrow will go deeper into how do you really dig through the weeds and plan out these day-to-day lessons plan in more detail. So if you notice, this is again in the folder under Module 3, the complete lesson plan. But I had decided to do a home design. The students ended up designing a home for a family that lived in Oklahoma City. And one of the things that occurred is after they had got introduced to the problem, they needed to actually interview the client. So if you notice, one of my lessons is actually about interviewing. So the learning goal was I can ask useful questions. I can generate initial design for a home was the secondary one. They had a miniature lesson on basically the driving question and the class questions that came up. And then I introduced the class to Mrs. Cumbie. And then students took turns asking questions that we had already created and wrote down the answers that Miss Cumbie had shared. And because she didn't take up the entire class time in this instance, or if she didn't, then the second part of the lesson is starting to have them research possible home ideas, design ideas based upon what she had just shared. They were given a couple of sites as a reference point to look through to generate their ideas. And then after Ms. Cumbie had left, we talked about how they felt about the interviewing process. And they could, for homework, keep researching home ideas. And then we always end with them sort of coming back to what's their new questions. And so I, in a kind of manipulative way, help them to think of what we need to work on the next day. And so I anticipate trying to help them understand that they probably really need to understand more about the design principles in a home and perimeter and area, as well as, why is homes quadrilaterally shaped? And so that brings us to the day 2, where they're starting to learn about perimeter and area using classmates. And then they also look at different aspects of quadrilaterals and their benefits as well as drawbacks. So you fold in each day, sort of building on each other, but also leave room for days to move around. And so we'll talk about this in more detail tomorrow, but this concludes our module for today. There is no particular assignment other than reviewing the details in the lesson plan and coming up with questions that you want to ask in our live broadcast tomorrow.